And tonight, we welcome a new Rosalie Award recipient, Susan Marjetti. Susan Marjetti is the Senior Managing Director of CBC Toronto, Radio, TV, and Digital, as well as the Ontario region of stations. She worked as an award-winning programmer and journalist for nearly 20 years before moving into CBC management. She did that in 1998. And as I was doing some research on Susan, I discovered that she's also a wonderful artist with some beautiful paintings. And there's so much more about her, so let's watch this video.
My story is probably one of, I guess I'd say, perseverance. Every day I approach with a sense of purpose.
The people are dressed in black and all the cars, they look the same.
For too long, the media did not look or sound like the changing demographic, and for me, it's always been about the audience. In many ways, that commitment to diversity and inclusion, that became my life's work. I'm going to take you now to one end of the continent, to Sydney, Nova Scotia, on the east coast of Canada, and that's where I grew up. I was just a little girl, a DJ, spinning tunes at local dances. But I always dreamed I'd work in radio, and that there was something out there, maybe something I had to offer. My mom was my first inspiration. Growing up, she taught me that everyone counts, and that each of us can make a difference.
A few months ago, Susan told us that she'd be leaving us locally. She's now the brand new executive director for radio and audio for all of English CBC.
I think they want another song, Paul.
I know there's something for you out there in this life. I know there's something for you out there in this life. I know there's something for you out there in this life. I know there's something for you out there in this
Before we bring Susan up onto stage, I'd like to welcome someone who knows and has worked with Susan very closely. Please welcome executive producer of CBC Radio, Joan Mellinson.
That video was put together by Jen Williams from CBC Toronto Communications. Well done, it's lovely. So I'm Joan. I've known Susan, I've worked with Susan, with her, for more years than I care to talk about, but long enough to know that I can't imagine anyone else getting this award, the Rosalie Award, than Susan. At the beginning of the video, she said that hers is really a story about perseverance. So I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes talking about what perseverance looks like in Susan Marjetti's world. So I want you to imagine, if you can, a 15-year-old girl. Got it? With a dream. She's growing up in Sydney, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and her dream is to one day work in radio. So what does she do about that? She calls up the local radio station in Sydney, her hometown, and says, I'd like to talk to somebody that can give me some advice about how to get into the business. And the woman, anybody here from Cape Breton? No? Okay. I'm part Cape Bretoner, so I can say this. The woman on the phone says, forget about it, dear. Just kind of like that, Susan. You're not going to amount to anything in this business. So what did Susan do? She didn't pay any attention to Miss Forget About It, dear. And she applied to the RTA program at the Radio and Television Arts, as it was known then, at Ryerson University. And Miss Forget About It, dear, back in Cape Breton must have had some influence, because Ryerson turned her down. She didn't get accepted. So what did she do about that? She waited a year. She applied again. And she wasn't going to wait for the rejection letter or the acceptance letter. So she asked her older sister to drive her to Toronto. It's from Sydney to Toronto. That's a bit of a haul. And when she gets there, she stages what can only be described as a one-person sit-in. She wouldn't leave the admissions office at Ryerson University until they told her that this time the dream is coming true. They accepted her. And Susan would go on to prove that that was a really good decision on Ryerson's part. She graduated top of her class, but she wasn't there for her graduation. More perseverance. Susan was actually back in Nova Scotia applying for a reporter job at a radio station called CHNS in Halifax. Good hire, CHNS. So in Susan's years as a reporter, her many years in private radio, and then on with the CBC, she worked really, really hard to make sure to reflect the largest, most underrepresented communities wherever she was. That's perseverance, and I think perseverance continues to define her leadership. So I'd like you all to join me in congratulating Susan Marjetti on winning the Rosalie Award.
Congratulations, Susan.
Thank you.
That
That would be great, actually, thanks. Wow. Thank you very, very, very much. And thank you for that, Joan. I am still persevering. My dear friend, Joan, we go way, way back. What Joan didn't tell you about is how we met. She was winning the Most Outstanding Journalist Award. This was in the mid-'80s in Atlantic Canada at the Atlantic Journalism Awards. It was the first time at that time that a woman would win the Journalist of the Year award, and she is to this day one of the most outstanding journalists I have ever worked with. I have to thank you all for being here, the Rosalie Awards. I was honored to meet Rosalie's children. I have known of Rosalie's, what I call the Midas touch, for a very long time. I was honored a few years ago when Denise Donlin was winning the Rosalie Award to be invited to. Actually, Denise interviewed us about women in our lives, women role models, and how it affected us in the business. So thank you, Radio Trailblazers. Thank you to the judges. I can't leave this microphone without giving a little shout out to Laurie Beckstead for nominating me. I was shocked. I seriously thought they made a mistake. Nancy sent me the email, and I went through, and I went, no. And I did it again, and I was like, okay, it still says my name on it. I really was shocked. As Joan said, Jennifer Williams put together that video, and you know what? It's really hard to do a video for a radio person like me. I don't have a lot of video. It's been 35 years in the business, and I just, radio people don't have a lot of video. So Jennifer Williams, God love you. You did an outstanding job. Thank you very, very much. It's true, I was just a little wee one thinking about radio. Like, what the hell's up with that? In Sydney, Nova Scotia, I had a little transistor, which I did this amazing thing with an old coat hanger, and I would hang it out of my window, and I would listen to some of the biggest stations in the world, in New York, in Detroit, in Chicago. Every now and again you get one in Europe, and I was just jazzed. And I thought, someday, I want to work in radio. And then I started to study music, and it was my music teacher who said, no, honey, music's not for you. Mr. Brown really urged me to follow my first dream and pursue a career in radio. Joan was telling you the truth. I called one woman when I was spinning tunes as a teenage DJ at the local dances, and I called one woman at a radio station. She said, my dear God, love you, dear. You never get in. You never get in. I didn't get in. You won't get in. And I used that to spur me on. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get in, and if I can get accepted at Ryerson and graduate, I'll be the first in my family to graduate from university. And maybe, just maybe, I'll get a job and I'll have an opportunity to make a difference. I want to tell you why I am so, to this day, it's like 35 years, right? Radio still moves me. It's such a powerful medium. The sound of the human voice, telling stories, creating images, making those emotional connections. It is to this day so powerful, even as the world around us changes in terms of technology. In fact, you know, there are two seismic changes that our industry is facing, and they both go directly back to the audience. One, the technological changes that we are seeing, and of course, two, the massive and seismic demographic changes. And, you know, in my first years in broadcasting, it just seemed so obvious to me that whether the private or public sector, that we were not looking and sounding like the diverse makeup of our communities. It was just not acceptable. And I set about, everybody can make a difference, my mom always said. I set about to begin in small ways to tell more of those stories, and to begin to, ultimately, you have to change the inside and the workforce, ultimately, if you want to change the outside. And that would permeate all of my work throughout my career, no matter what city I was in. I would work very hard to tell stories and to play music that otherwise wasn't being played or told on that station. And I'm still doing it today. If I may, if you will indulge me for a minute, nobody gets to stand here for a sec without having an incredible team. I'm going to ask all of the CBC people, being shy sorts, they probably want to run out of the room now, to come up here and just join me for a second, if you would. All the CBC people. So, for 15 years, I was the senior managing director of CBC Toronto. And I'll never forget, I was so excited. I wanted to come back to Toronto for like 20 years. I kept applying for jobs. I wouldn't get them. Persevering. Finally, I get hired. I'm coming back. 2001 is the year. And I walk around and I meet the new team locally and I shake their hands and I say, these programs, they got to start looking and sounding like the diversity of this city. Never entered my mind that that would be so difficult.
As a friend of mine who happens to be the diversity coordinator at ABC in Australia says, utterly sensible. Yes, it is. And yet, why has it taken so long? I think the public broadcaster has a special duty to lead in this way and to lead the industry. And I think we're not where we need to be. We're not there yet. One thing about this work is it never ends. It's not a file. Never stops. You gotta, every day, you gotta feel it, you gotta believe it, and you gotta do it. You gotta walk your talk. So if I may, I'd like to introduce a few people here. When we were making our changes in 2001 at CBC Toronto, there was someone on the right side of me and someone on the left side of me, and they were making it happen. On my right was Joan Melanson, who you heard speak a moment ago. And Joan, her job was to take that vision and implement it every single day in terms of the decisions and choices that were being made. On my left, the gentleman here, Nick Davis. We were getting a lot of pushback, and it surprised a few people when I announced that Nick Davis was, at the time, it was 2005, the new senior producer of Metro Morning, our flagship morning show. And under Nick's leadership, that show would continue to dominate morning radio in the Toronto market. And Nikki was making smart choices that helped deepen our connection with the communities that make up Toronto. So Nikki and Joan, first off, I just want to say thank you. If I could, I'd like to introduce my senior directors. So I'm now at the network. As somebody said, someone was standing on the street in Ottawa talking to me one day and said, "Oh, it's a miracle, Susan, that you got this job." He says, "You're so outspoken. I can't believe they've made you part of senior management." And I said, "I'm surprised too." Again, I have great people around me. I'd like to introduce my Senior Director of Talk, responsible for all journalism, Kathy Perry. Senior Director of Audio Innovation, Leslie Merklinger. Now, let me just tell you something about Leslie Merklinger and Kathy Perry. So, not only are they living in a digital and diverse world, but I want to tell you about a result we just found out about a couple of days ago, because Kathy's team in journalism, they do a lot of podcasts on our big shows like The Current, and Leslie Merklinger's team creates some of our original podcasts like Someone Knows Something. Well, we just found out a couple of days ago that in the past year, our podcast, CBC's #1 in podcasting in Canada, we just topped, get this, 100 million downloads in the past year. Anne McKeegan, Director, Radio Music. Anne has been developing talent and really at the fore of bringing diverse talent into the CBC for decades and has never, I don't think ever, been called out and thanked on it. Thank you, Anne McKeegan. Sandra Porteous. No, everyone knows, don't give Sandra the mic. Sandra and I work together locally. She was my deputy. But what I wanted to say is that Sandra is right now responsible for training and development. And she is part of leading and creating a whole new developing leaders training session that is going to create the next generation of leaders at CBC, all diverse, incredible people who will take their place and make a difference in this business. Thank you, Sandra. Fabiola Choyan? Fabiola? Is that not a fabulous name? That's my most favorite name. Fabiola actually manages me and runs my office. Leslie Peck moves like water around rocks. I've seen her at international events, and she works the room, building our relationships and our brand all over the world, because CBC is studied for its work in diversity and also its digital leadership. So thank you very much, Leslie Peck. I'm going to ask the communications team to just stand forward a little bit. These women are amazing. You know, they understand, it is inherent in communications, they understand that at the core, we are in the business of building relationships. One person, one story, one song, one event at a time. These are the people who have to build those relationships, build trust, get us into the communities, and help build our brand and reach. And they're selling the value of what we do. It's amazing. They are, in my world, they are stars. And I would just like to introduce them, if I may. Maya Kane. Carla Palmer. Nadia Greenidge, Jennifer Williams, Emily Mills. Am I missing anyone there? At the very end, Samya Gautam, I want to thank you for inspiring us. Samya used to be with our Human Resources Department, you're now with Rogers, but you still continue to inspire us. I want to introduce from Human Resources, you don't make seismic change without great people around you. You don't make seismic change without strong people, culture, HR people. And I want to give a shout out to Jennifer Ribello tonight from our HR department. Oh yeah, no. Senior Director of Music, the guy who actually made a couple of phone calls and did a little concert in the summer with the Tragically Hip that would net 11.7 million audience. Mr. Mark Steinmetz. These people are trailblazers. They blaze trails every day. They're smart, creative, hardworking. They get up every morning and they're here to serve the public, and I'm honored, truly honored, to work with them. I can't wrap up, however, without giving a shout out to Chris Purdy, who said, please. Chris Purdy is my inspiration. Chris Purdy was one of the first women in radio and TV and music who fought for inclusion. Chris Purdy has made a difference in this country. Chris Purdy has made a difference with everything Chris Purdy has touched. Chris Purdy, thank you very much. I lost my mom a few years ago. She really, well, I don't even know if I can talk about her without breaking down. But she meant the world to me. And she really always said, you know, no matter what rejection, what would happen, you know, in a child's life, she'd be like, you can do it. You believe that. You get out there. You make a difference. And she always said, every one of us, you have a chance. Make it count. Make a difference. So the last thought I'd like to leave you with is, keep making a difference. You have that chance, that opportunity. It matters to so many people. Thank you very much.